Today we're talking actual physical control. That's the situation where you're arrested for an offense like DUI, but you were never driving the vehicle. The vehicle was parked, stopped, or otherwise not moving. There's a lot of confusion about whether you can be convicted for DUI when you weren't driving the car. We're going to talk today about what the law says. We're going to look at it from a statutory standpoint, a case law standpoint, and a juror standpoint. Stick around to the end. We're going to show a real-world application in the direct examination of a police officer in a real-world case. Let's dig in. If we haven't met yet, my name's Jeff Lauder. I'm a Florida licensed attorney, and I use my unique experience in law enforcement to show you how the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and how this government thing works in real-world application in the courtroom. If that sounds like something you're interested in? Hit that subscribe button. Actual physical control is like the little brother to driving under the influence. It's generally seen as less egregious than driving under the influence, but it's punishable just the same. There's some circumstances in my local jurisdiction where being in actual physical control is actually worse for you if you're a first-time offender than if you were actually caught driving. So we're gonna look at this in three different ways. First, we're gonna take a look at what the law says in the statutory construction, show you how I got there. Second, we're gonna take a look at the jury instructions. It'll provide some definition and some context to the law. Third, we're gonna use a free case law search engine that Google provides, and we're going to take a look at a couple cases that the courts wrestled with this issue of actual physical control so we can put some context to historically what the courts have done. Finally, we're going to listen to the direct examination of the police officer from this video here. If you haven't watched that video yet, I'll put a link to it up here, and I'll put a link to it in the description down below. So we're going to go into Google, we're going to type Florida State Statutes, and that's going to direct us to where we need to be. Chapter 316 is the primary traffic chapter, meaning that's where all your speeding tickets, most of your moving violations, they're going to take place in 316. We're going to look up actual physical control. You'll see there's 15 different incidents of actual physical control mentioned throughout the Florida statutes. The first one is in the definition section. Any person who drives or is in actual physical control of a vehicle on a highway or is exercising control of a vehicle or steering a vehicle being towed by a motor vehicle. Man, that's a lot. There's a lot of legally significant words there that you might gloss over pretty quickly, like vehicle and highway. Those have very specific legal meanings that you need to be aware of if you're going to be defending yourself or defending your client. You can find those in this definition section. It's outside the scope of this video, so we're going to move on. Let's take a look and see what the other context is for actual physical control throughout the statute. They mention actual physical control 15 different times, 2 of which are in the definition section, and the rest of the 15 times, those are all related to some sort of way to DUI. When you're allowed to test, when you're allowed to arrest, when you're allowed to take blood. But it didn't really give us anything solid to work from a definition standpoint. Let's take a look at the jury instructions now and see what the jury instructions say. So you're looking at the jury instructions. These are available online too. You just download it from the Florida Supreme Court's website. These instructions have been qualified or approved by the Florida Supreme Court to instruct a jury in how to find a person guilty or not guilty in a DUI case. So this is the actual document that we would use in court. Obviously, we'd cater it a little bit to the case, the he's and she's and case numbers and stuff like that. But we would submit this document with the jury. They would take this back to deliberations with them, and it's one of the pieces of their instructions. It's important for us here today because it provides definition, a real-world working definition. So let's look at this. To prove the crime of driving under the influence, the state must prove the following 2 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. That defendant drove or was in actual physical control of a vehicle, and while driving or in actual physical control of the vehicle was under the influence to the extent they didn't have control of their normal faculties, or the alternative if they had a breath or blood alcohol level over the 0.08 level. We're not going to go into that. That's not what we're here for. Right down here is where we're looking at. Actual physical control of a vehicle means the defendant must be physically in or on the vehicle and have the capability to operate the vehicle regardless of whether he or she is actually operating the vehicle at the time. Actual physical control of a vehicle means in or on with the capability to operate. That's your standard. Is the person in or on the vehicle with the capability to operate the vehicle? So now we've looked at the statute, we've looked at the jury instructions, we've got some clearer definition. Let's take a look at the case law now and figure out how the courts have interpreted this over the years. If you haven't heard of it, Google Scholar is an excellent case law search engine. We're going to start here. We're going to click on cases or case law. I'm going to go to Florida because that's where I'm at. I've already pre-typed the term in here, actual physical control. That brings up cases with which we can look at. If you look at the sort order here, it says anytime. If we stick with the anytime reference, you'll see the cases at the top are the most relevant cases for the term we've searched. Google's pretty good at that. So Griffin and Fissleman are the two cases we're going to look at today, but we're going to look at them through the context of Fissleman only, because the court in Fissleman wrestled with the issue of actual physical control. And if you look at the dates here, Fissleman in 1988 and Griffin in 1984, the Fissleman court references back to Griffin and uses an example. So we'll learn about both at the same time and maybe provide some boundary lines for what's important with regards to the capability to operate segment of the instruction. So factually in Fissleman, he's sleeping in a car, he's in the driver's seat, the seat's tilted back, headlights on, car off, but the keys are in the ignition. That's what the court's dealing here factually with. The defense attorney in the Fissleman case is asking the court to rule as a matter of law that Fissleman in that position is not in actual physical control, that he's not controlling anything, and therefore this DUI has to be dismissed. The court doesn't go there. The court takes a look at the Griffin case from 1984. Remember the one we just looked at? In the Griffin case, the circumstances are that the police officer finds the vehicle stopped in the travel lane, he's facing the wrong direction, the car's turned off, but the guy's foot is on the brake. And so the rear brake lights are activated. The court really hung its hat in Griffin on the fact that the depressed brake pedal was the critical factor, or at least a substantial critical factor, that he was necessarily exercising control over the vehicle. So if you take the foot off the brake pedal there, you have a much stronger case. They've also kind of wrestled around with the idea, or at least the Fissleman court wrestled around with the idea that in Griffin there was evidence that he drove there. Right? How does car get stopped in the middle of the roadway? Somebody just plant him there? No, he probably drove there. So there's at least circumstantial evidence showing that Griffin drove. But Fissleman is sleeping in the car in a parking lot. He may have driven there completely sober, went inside the bar, had a bunch of drinks, walked out the bar, had never intended on driving, never did drive under the influence, and now he's being convicted of DUI. That's kind of what the court said, hey, there's a different scenario here. Lastly, we point out that the evidence of the key, whether it's in the ignition or out of the ignition, that isn't the critical factor alone. It's merely a fact, along with the defendant's presence asleep and intoxicated in the vehicle. That precludes the court from determining as a matter of law that he was not in actual physical control. The court's saying this is a matter for the jury to decide. You can argue this to the jury, but the court's not going to draw a line in the sand. If he's in the car, it's going to be a close call, then we're going to leave that up to the jury. That's what I get out of this. Those are just two cases in the dozens and dozens and dozens of cases covering actual physical control. Those are older cases. Look for the most recent case law in your jurisdiction that's applicable for your court system. I don't want people to confuse legal advice with me teaching these general principles. Now that we've discussed actual physical control from 3 different standpoints, let's go to the courtroom and listen to a quick direct examination of a police officer in an actual physical control case. My client was found sleeping in the car when the police walked up to him and interacted, and he got charged with DUI for being in actual physical control.
All right, so you may call you first.
That's the judge.
All right, the rule is hereby invoke all witnesses.
That was me.
that are scheduled to testify today will remain outside the courtroom and not discuss your testimony with one another. State, you may call your first witness. Okay, come forward, officer. The motion to suppress is scheduled for 1 hour. I will be holding you all to that time.
Can you please state your name for the
That's the prosecutor.
record? What is your occupation?
I'm a community service officer with the Atlanta Police Department.
How long have you worked there?
It'll be 7 years now.
Do you have any prior law enforcement experience?
No.
Do you have any experience regarding the detection of impaired drivers?
No.
Did you come into contact with a person who was later known to you as?
Yes.
Do you see that person in the courtroom today?
Yes. He's wearing a dark colored suit, multicolored tie, and a white shirt.
May the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant?
The record will so reflect.
Why did you come in contact with the defendant?
I was flagged down. I was working in the area near Millennium Mall, near Total Wine, and I was flagged down by an employee that was letting me know that there was a guy that appeared to be passed out in a car, but the car was in the aisleway and in a parking space, so kind of blocking traffic.
So would you say it was when you saw the car? Would you say that it was actually blocking the traffic?
It was.
Was the car on?
Yes, it was turned on. It was running.
Was anybody else in the car that you can see?
No.
So applying what we learned, it looks like they have a good actual physical control case here. The community service officer walks up to the car. He's in the car. He's passed out, unresponsive. She has a bang on the window. The keys are in the ignition. The car's running. These are all the factors and circumstances the court would look at to make a determination of guilt or innocence with regards to the actual physical control aspect. There's a big but here, and I've already talked about it briefly. I mentioned the term. I don't know if you guys are going to catch on to it. Let's keep watching the video. I'll discuss that part at the end.
So what did you do when you went to the car?
I went up to the window, the driver's window, and was asking if the gentleman was okay, but there was no response, so I started banging hard on the window.
Did that person wake up?
Finally, yeah.
Talk to me how long you think it took you to wake him up?
Maybe a minute or two.
And you said you banged on the window hard?
Yes, I thought I was gonna break the window at one point.
So what did you do when he woke up? Did you speak to him?
I did. Once I finally got him to kind of focus on me, I asked him if he can turn the car off.
Okay.
And then I ended up calling the fire department. Had our headquarters call the fire department.
Did the fire department come?
No, the officers actually ended up getting there first.
Did you call officers?
No, as my role as a community service officer, if we call out something as far as the fire department or something like that, a sworn officer will arrive just to make sure that we're okay.
Is that customary for your department?
Generally, yeah.
About how long would you say it took for backup to arrive?
Within a few minutes. I believe the officer was in the area also doing holiday cheer.
What were you wearing on the day of this community?
Our regular uniform, it's changed since that point, but it was a French blue colored polo shirt and then regular midnight blue slacks and then our duty belt. And on our shirts it says Civilian Orlando Police Department, so it identifies us.
Did you smell any kind of odor from the vehicle?
It just smelled strange, but I wasn't sure what it was. I wasn't sure where it was coming from, but it came out of the car and him.
When you say strange, what do you mean strange?
It didn't smell like a normal person, like if they're clean.
Okay.
So it just smelled weird, but I don't know how to describe it better.
When you were speaking to the defendant, did you notice anything about his eyes?
I wasn't looking too hard, but he just didn't look 100% alert, which is why I called the fire department. I didn't know if it was medical or any issue.
Okay. So when officers arrived on scene, what did you communicate to him?
I just told him where I found the car and that I was flagged down and that I called the fire department because I just wasn't sure what was going on with the gentleman, and then told him this is what I have.
And at this point, the fire department was still en route?
I believe they may have gotten canceled by one of the officers.
Do you know why?
I don't know.
Okay. Before officers arrived on scene, did the defendant get out of the vehicle while you were there with him?
I don't believe so, no.
Once officers and officers were there, did he get out of the vehicle?
At some point, I'm just not sure when.
Okay. Were you the arresting officer during this encounter?
I don't have arresting authority.
Okay. Thank you, officer. I don't have any further questions.
Okay.
So they've got actual physical control, but she's not a police officer. So the law requires the police officer observe all the elements of the crime of DUI. So she's established actual physical control as a witness standpoint, but that's not very substantial, legally speaking. You have to see how this unfolds. We got the cross-examination coming up next. We're going to use that as a teaching point. We're going to work our way through this entire case. If you haven't watched that body camera video, you should probably watch it. Pay attention to it. Watch it all the way through to understand. Work through this DUI case with me. Subscribe, keep supporting the channel. Ask your questions down below. I'm feeding off your questions, guys. I'm feeding off it. Thank you for supporting us. Hit it hard.